This is looking more promising, so fingers crossed.
It's saying it's streaming live.
Is it? And yeah, that's it. Okay, sorry about that.
Hopefully okay. Well done, Sonia. Tell me when.
Fine. We're fine to start, please, Chairman.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Rochdale District Council's Remote Standards Committee meeting. And welcome to anyone who is watching this via our live stream. So if we can turn to the agenda. Agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. No apologies have been received, and in the office, are there any apologies for absence, members?
We have apologies from Councillor Stanley and from Mrs. Linda Walker.
Thank you, Sonia. Agenda item number 2, substitute members. I understand Councillor Stuart Wilson is attending as a substitute member on behalf of the Green Group. And I believe Councillor Newport is attending on behalf of Councillor Stanley. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you. Agenda item number 3, non-members attending.
So we have, yeah, we have attending Chairman Councillor FD, Councillor Mrs. Mason, Councillor Ward, Councillor Mrs. Rowe, Councillor Wootton, and Councillor Sperring.
Thank you, Sonia. So moving forward, agenda item number 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of September 2019. For those who are present, are the minutes agreed, please, members?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. At this point, I'd like to refer members to the final page of the minutes. These refer to the recommendation to full council that the council approved on the 18th of February 2020. And this reads that the composition of the member training working group be decided and constituted by the Standards Committee starting from the next municipal year onwards. We are now in that municipal year, so members, I would like to ask, would anyone like to volunteer to sit on the working group during this municipal year? If you could please show your hands. Sorry, if you could raise your blue hand icon, that would be great. Thank you very much. So, and
Chairman, may I just ask a question? Sorry, as I'm substituting for Councillor Stanley.
yes, you may, Councillor Newport.
As Councillor Stanley is not here, I will put Councillor Stanley forward for the member working group, and I hope that he accepts that.
Let me just check with officers if that's possible. Is that correct, Angela?
If Councillor Newport is putting forward Councillor Stanley, and if he is chosen to be on the working group, he will be a member of that working group.
Thank you. So, correct me if we're wrong here. We have got Councillor Mrs. Gooding has put herself forward. Councillor Mr. Mike Steptoe. Councillor Mr. Stuart Wilson. Councillor Mrs. June Lumley. Councillor Mrs. Christine Mason. Sonia, you may be able to help me if I don't have to take my glasses off while I'm reading this. So I would like to put myself forward as well for the
Okay.
committee. So we have got
Excuse me,
1, 2, 3.
I was indicating to speak, not to put myself forward.
Did you want to take your hand back down at this point, Councillor Mason?
the decision that's being made at the moment. So I assume there would be some debate allowed.
You've got a question. Would you like to say that now, Councillor Mrs Mason?
I can speak now, can I? Thank you. Yeah, I would like to question this. One of the strengths and the working group for the last 3 years one of the strengths of the working groups for the last 3 years has been that it's been compiled of a member from each group, which has led to some robust and interesting debate. But it's also meant that there was no political bias on the working group, which I'm sure, bearing in mind it's for member participation and member training and learning, is something that we would hope not to go into it. And I think that before we ask for volunteers for the committee, the working group committee, we should consider how that committee is going to be compiled. I'm not eligible. Well, actually, anyone's eligible because you don't have to select from members of this committee. You can select from the whole council, but I'm not putting myself forward for the working group, just to be clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. Does anybody else want to speak on this?
Yes, may I speak? I'm not sure if I've managed to got my hand up on it.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, Mr Shadbolt.
I feel it would be better if it was non-party organised, however you wish to do that. And as far as the independents, we would take it in turns. That's how it worked before, and I must admit it did seem to work reasonably well.
Yes. Thank you. And yes, it's agreed. The independent representatives on the working group. We have just after Councillor Mrs Mason, we have had people now put themselves forward from the various groups.
Sorry, Chair.
Could you raise your hand, please? Thank you. So, Councillor Mrs Carter, you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Chair. And can I just say that I've just joined this committee, and I'd like to have it noted that obviously I wasn't at the last meeting, so I can't agree your minutes.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Councillor Mrs Carter. So, so we have 7 people put their names forward. This includes our independent member. Sonia, is it 5 members that we need for the? You're muted at the moment, Sonia.
So, Chairman, the committee can agree on the composition of the working group. It's for the committee to agree the size and the composition. Can we please have clarification of those members that are actually volunteering? Is it Councillor Stanley, Councillor Mrs Gooding, Councillor Steptoe, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Mrs Lumley, and Councillor Mrs Macpherson? Is that all the members? Are there no others that are wanting to put themselves forward? I'm trying to work out how many that is. 1, 2. That's 6 members, isn't it?
Did you have Councillor
plus the independent member, Mr Shadbolt?
Yep. Did you have Councillor Mr Steptoe on your list and Councillor Mrs Gooding?
I did, yeah. So that's 6 district members plus Mr Shadbolt.
Thank you, Sonia. So can you take us through the process, please?
So if members, I think we should formally have a roll call of names, Chairman, to agree to the working group being comprised of Councillor Stanley, Councillor Mrs Gooding, Councillor Steptoe, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Mrs Lumley, Councillor Mrs Macpherson and Mr Shadbolt.
Thank you, Sonia.
Okay, so we would need to go into a roll call of names so that we can have everyone's agreement to the composition and the names that I've just read out, Chairman.
Yep. Is everybody clear how that works? Would you like to explain it, please, Sonia, for members who don't usually go through this process?
So what we need to do is I will read out your names, and you will need to indicate if you want a recorded vote and whether you're voting for or against the composition and the membership of the working group, or whether or not you wish to abstain from voting. Okay. So if I start with Councillor Mrs Carter, please.
Thank you. Yes, a recorded vote and agree.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Gooding.
Not a recorded vote and I agree. Thank you.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No to a recorded vote and agree.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Lumley.
No to a recorded vote and agree.
Councillor Mrs Macpherson.
No to a recorded vote and agree.
Councillor Newport, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't unmute. No recorded vote and 4. Could you just record my name in the minutes, please?
Certainly. Councillor Steptoe.
No recorded vote and agree.
And Councillor Wilson.
No recorded vote and agree.
Thank you. Chairman, that was unanimous.
Thank you very much. Okay. Moved on to agenda item number 5. Are there any declarations of interest, please? There are none. Moving on, agenda item number 6. This is the local investigations and determinations from October 2019 to March 2020, and then April 2020 to September 2020. Angela Law, our monitoring officer, will present her report. If there are any questions on this item, please ask Angela to respond to those.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is the usual report that comes to Standards Committee, providing members with a summary of the complaints and queries received in relation to members' behaviour under the Code of Conduct. In this report, we have got 2 sets of summaries, one dating from October 2019 to March 2020, and then April 2020 to September 2020. That is because due to the pandemic, the Standards Committee was cancelled in March. A copy of the table and of the summary is appended to this report. Chairman, I'm asking members to note the summary of complaints received for that period of October 2019 to March 2020 and April 2020 to September 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Councillor Mr Newport.
Thank you,
You
Chairman.
have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. If I may ask Angela Law via yourself. On page 6.1, 2.5, the monitoring officer has stated there's no prescribed time limit for investigation of complaints. And I would like to know if that's applicable to a complaint made, actually, if I just refer on 6.6 SC0076, if a member discloses breaches of council's exempt private and confidential material and then subsequently is no longer a councillor because the time limit has gone over into an election period, how is that handled by the council's standards process? is it taken into a legal matter, or what would happen? Because I understand that to be a very serious offence. Thank you.
Chairman, under the legislation, unfortunately, if the councillor that is being complained of no longer is a councillor, then there's not much the council can do. The complaint actually ceases there. And it's not really much the council can do in terms of timing of the complaints received and how long the investigation takes. I do understand Councillor Newpoint's point about the serious offence, but again, in accordance with natural justice, all these complaints must be investigated thoroughly.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Newport?
Chairman, can I just follow that up with a...
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So if a councillor has a number of private and confidential documents and then subsequently is no longer a councillor and reveals the content of that, how would that be dealt with?
It really is down to the council. If they're no longer a councillor for whatever reason, whether they resign, whether they're deselected, whether they're not elected, really is down to the council to hand over all council equipment, papers and stuff. Like if councillors were issued with laptops, we wouldn't expect you to keep those laptops. If there's papers that are private and confidential, then we would expect, that's to do with council business, then we would expect that to be returned. If you receive private and confidential information in your capacity as a councillor dealing with your own constituents and you collected that data yourself, then that's a matter for you to deal with, and a matter for you, as you will be the data controller for that information, not the council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Carter, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Angela, I wonder if I could just ask you, on two of the complaints, it's saying that there is an apology for the next public meeting. That particular person has to make an apology. How are you monitoring that? Because obviously the next public meeting is probably not going to be happening for quite a while. So do you keep a check on this, please?
With regards, if it's a parish council, then obviously we have no control over when their public meetings will be, but we do liaise with the clerk and we do notify the clerk of my decision with regards to that. Unfortunately, under legislation, if the councillor refuses to apologise, there is not much recourse for me to. However, the decision that is published on the council website will have mentioned that there has been a breach and an apology is expected.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Carter, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely. Councillor Mr. Wilson, you've got a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's really just to follow up Councillor Newport's point and the monitoring officer's answer. As I understand it, that if you release this information, whether you're a councillor or not, have you actually committed a criminal offence? Is it a statutory offence? And an example would be someone who has central government information. They may leave the government employment, but if they leak that information, they're still covered by the Official Secrets Act. So irrespective of whether we can do something as a standards committee or you as a monitoring officer, have they actually committed a statutory offence?
Chairman, the information we usually deal with doesn't really fall under the Official Secrets Act or really any national security. If there is a disclosure, then and it is a criminal offence, then yes, that will be dealt with by other enforcement agencies. The only criminal offence under the Code of Conduct is really if there's a fraud that the councillor has acted upon, but really all the offences are civil under the Code of Conduct.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, does that answer your question?
Well, sort of, but it raises another question, which is what comeback is there on someone? In effect, what you're saying is that anyone can release this information and it will go through civil court, which will probably take forever. So actually there's almost no sanction. Is that the case?
Unfortunately, Chairman, that is a weakness of the legislation. There is almost no sanction. However, it will depend upon each case and the facts of each case as to how serious that disclosure is. And the council will then decide what appropriate action to take from that point onwards.
Thank you. Councillor, Mr Mike Steptoe.
Thanks, Chair. Two points, if I may, Chairman. One, picking up on the point that Councillor Carter raised. If the councillor refuses to give an apology, can I ask the monitoring officer, even if it is a parish councillor, can that councillor be requested to have training instead of? That's my first question. Do that first.
Yes, Chairman, with regards to sanctions, you can ask for an apology, but there can be recommendations for training and other appropriate recommendations, depending on what the breach has been. It can even include taking away the member's equipment if it's necessary.
Sorry, perhaps I didn't make myself clear. If, as it's a parish member in this particular instance we're talking about, if that parish member doesn't agree to give an apology, a public apology, can you then go back and recommend that parish councillor has further training?
I can recommend that there is further training. However, again, there's nothing within my power to force that member to have additional training. However, this is where we have to work with the clerks, and the clerks would have to, and the chairmans of those parishes, and persuade that member to do so.
Thank you. My second point, Chairman, picking up on Councillor Wilson's point with private and confidential, if a member ceases to be a member but is being party to commercially sensitive information, particularly over contracts, and releases that information to the competitors within the contract, how would that be dealt with?
It would depend on what the commercial agreement is. Sometimes there may have been some undertakings given by the council that, and the members would have had to declare that they would not release that information. And once that declaration is made, should anything happen to that information and it is released, then any legal action that could be taken against the council and that ex-member, then that ex-member would not be protected. We would not be offering protection against that for that member.
So potentially there still could be litigation against that particular
Absolutely.
member, or ex-member, we should say.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Mrs Cohen.
No, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Councillor Mrs Cohen.
Yeah, I believe that NALC have drafted a new code of conduct that I don't know how far it's gone, but it does contain more sanctions and penalties than are currently in existence. It's just a comment really that is in the pipeline.
Chairman, just in response to that, the LGA, the Local Government Association, has drafted a new model code of conduct, and that was recently subject to consultation for all members and all officers. That consultation is closed, and currently the council currently the council is waiting on the results of that consultation before we can take anything forward.
Thank you, Angela. I've got a question. It's again on page 6.6, item 4, SC0076. This appears to me to be quite a serious breach. Now, we're not privy to the information behind this, but attending a code of conduct training and then no further action, was that the sole sanction? Because what will deter somebody from possibly doing this again? Are there further sanctions?
Chairman, I believe in this case, what happened was that the member, it was a human error that it was released, and he, as soon as it was made, as soon as he was made aware by the managing director, swift action was taken to remove that information, and he did apologise to the council.
So can I follow up then? Obviously, it wasn't included in this that it was done accidentally. Should it have been something shared with intent to share it, even though it shouldn't be, what would be the sanction then?
Sorry, Chairman, could you repeat that again?
If confidential information is shared with intent, what would the sanction be?
Well, again, Chairman, it depends on each case and the facts of each case, and how it happened. That's why investigations are very important, because depending on what happened and the mindset behind it, that can help determine what sanctions are taken at the end.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? I can see no more hands raised. In which case, if we can go to the bottom of page 6.1, there's one recommendation that the summary of complaints and determinations for the period October 2019 to March 2020 and April 2020 to September 2020 be noted. Is that noted, members?
Noted.
Thank you very much. Okay. Moving on. Agenda item number 7, report of the Standards Working Group. Firstly, may I thank the chairman of the working group, Councillor Mrs Mason, and ask her to introduce the report of the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to thank all the members of the Member Learning and Development Working Group for all the hard work that they have input since 2017, when this group was formed. Whilst all members contributed in a positive and constructive manner, the continuity provided by Councillors Mrs Hoy, Councillor Stanley and Councillor Mrs Weston and Mr Shadbolt as the independent person deserves special thanks. I would also like to place on record the valuable assistance provided by our officer, Michelle Powell, whose extensive knowledge greatly assisted the group. The Member Learning and Development Group have been successful in covering the legal requirements of training and members' needs within a fixed budget. The group have achieved a great deal of improvements in the 3 years of programmes that they have produced, some of which are member and officer suggestions sought and incorporated, the length of training sessions being determined by the need and nature of the training with appropriate breaks to facilitate concentration, post-course questionnaires simplified and anonymised, induction training, training for staff that are requested to provide training to members, it's a mouthful that one, alteration to the development training to accommodate the differing needs between new and experienced members, increased use of LGA trainers and changing trainers to encourage greater attendance, and addressing the concerns over code of conduct training by splitting parish and district sessions. That's not a fully inclusive list, but it shows the wealth of activity that the Member Learning and Development Group Working Group undertook. As can be expected from a group comprised of members from each political group, there have been some robust discussions and some funny moments, such as when we found a member of staff had decided to join our group. Has decided to join our group to promote an item they felt members should consider without any prior communication or request to attend. It is unusual for working groups to suddenly find an uninvited stranger in their midst. The coronavirus pandemic has necessitated some alterations to the planned training due to staff difficulty, and courses have been delivered by Zoom. The effectiveness of this, I'm sure, will be assessed in due course. The 2 areas of difficulty that remained are the concerns over chairmanship, which I'm sure will be addressed in future, and the problems created by the licensing and appeals training. The report circulated was achieved after very lengthy and robust debate and seeks to address the concerns raised in relation to licensing and appeals, particularly those of perceived inequality of treatment of members. In my view, the strength and success of this working group was due to the benefit of all political groups having equal representation, thus ensuring a balance in an area that affects all members equally. I regret that this committee has decided to alter that tonight. I will now take any questions from the report. However, I would like to make some small amendments to the recommendations at the end in light of the changing circumstances. So if the chairman will bear with me, I'll take any questions that members have and then return to the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. Councillor Mrs Gooding, I believe you've got a question.
Oh, can I just ask for some clarification? It's on item 7, page 7.2, recommendation 2, please. What happens if a member doesn't attend both training sessions by the end of September in that municipal year?
I can clarify that. That was one of the alterations that we were, I was going to propose altering. We would change must to. We cannot, it's not a legal requirement that members of the committee have to attend training sessions. What we're trying to do is to encourage and to reinforce the importance. So that Councillor Mrs Gooding was one of the areas that I wanted to alter, where to read that members of the Licensing and Appeals Committee should rather than must. There's nothing we can do if members don't wish to attend training.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Septo, you've got a question.
Thank you, Chairman. My question really is with regards to the recommendations. Now, it will be relevant to any alterations that Councillor Mason is about to propose. So I'd like to hold my questions back until she's had a chance to give those amendments to the recommendations, because it may not be relevant.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Has anybody else any questions? Councillor Mrs Gooding, did you want to come back on something?
Yeah, obviously it is subject to what Councillor Mrs Mason is proposing, but if they're only encouraged to attend these training, if you've not attended any training, would you actually be eligible to be on a committee if you've had no training for it?
Yeah, if I can clarify this, Councillor Mrs Gooding, the training is not for the committee. The committee is a policy committee, and I'm sure Angela Law will confirm this, because we have had lengthy debates in the working group and various reports. But the committee, you do not require training to sit on the committee. You require training to sit on the appeals and the licensing appeals. And that's where the conundrum comes in. We explored lots of alternatives, such as allowing all councillors to train, so that we had a bigger pool that apparently would not be legally compliant. The members have to be drawn from that committee, but because of the nature of the committee, you can't compel members to train. Does that clarify that for you enough, Councillor Mrs Gooding, or do you want further clarification?
Sorry, it was just the fact that it is the Appeals and Licensing Committee I was referring to.
That's the one, yes, I know it is. And the Appeals and Licensing Committee, you do not need training to sit on it. You need training to sit on the appeals hearings and the licensing hearings. Perhaps I'm not explaining this well enough. Perhaps I could ask our legal officer, Angela Law, to clarify that for you.
Yes, I think Angela would like to do that. There we are.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So for clarification, the members are members of the Licensing and Appeals Committee. If members do not attend training, it does not mean they're disqualified as members of the Licensing and Appeals Committee itself. However, if members have not attended the appropriate training, I would not be able to give assurance on that for that member to say that they have the appropriate training to deal with any appeals or reviews coming up with regards to, say, a taxi license, a premises license, and so forth. And given that these the decisions of the appeals could go to a magistrate's court, then it would not, like I said, I would not be able to give assurance that our members have had the appropriate training and information to make such robust decisions as needed to stand up to challenge.
Thank you, Angela. I've got some questions, if that's okay, and some comments. Recommendation 1, I don't see any problem in that at all. As part of the working group, we agree that it brings expertise to the council that can be shared. Now, Councillor Mrs Mason, you may already have preempted this, but I've been speaking with our licensing officer. This was due to the fact that in recommendation 2, we were offering further training one-to-one basis. Now, this working group produced this pre-COVID. So I took it upon myself to make sure that that offer was still possible. Unfortunately, at this current time, our licensing officer who provided the training does not have the capacity. So I will wait to hear your amendments to that. And recommendation number 3, I'm afraid I cannot support in any form. During the working group, I did air my concerns that we were stepping into the realm of operational matters that should be left to officers. I did ask if there was any report or anything from our officer, and I was told at the working group that it had been a conversation and the officers were happy with this. Now, I then asked if there had been anything passed over, and I had a paper. Now, this process works well as it is. And my view is we should leave that to officers. So I will wait for your amendments, Councillor Mrs Mason, but item 3 I will not be supporting. Thank you. Is there any more questions? I believe Councillor Mrs Lumley, you've got some questions.
Thank you, Chairman. It was more of a comment than a question in relation to membership of the licensing and appeals committees, that we have to be absolutely certain that there are sufficient members on those committees that are prepared to undertake the respective necessary training to be able to be available for choosing from a pool of members who can at short notice be ready for an appeal. That was all.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Steptoe had his hand raised before, but if he's okay for me to proceed. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I just wanted to pick up on. The monitoring officer said about she wouldn't be confident of anyone sitting on a hearing if they hadn't been trained. But is the training a statutory requirement, or is it just a requirement of the monitoring officer or the council in terms of, you know, making sure that, you know, we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's in case it does go to court or appeal? That was my first question. And I'll just pick up on a point you made yourself, Chairman, and I think it was about the one-to-one training, and you said that they didn't have the capacity. Am I right in that's what you said, didn't you, about the one-to-one training? Yeah.
You are correct, Councillor Newport, and my suggestion, but I'm awaiting Councillor Mrs Mason's rewording, would be that we work with other councils for members who miss our training to be able to access them.
Yeah, no, I was just coming back to that one-to-one training and the capacity issue, because it kind of, I've asked repeatedly about resourcing at the council, and I've been assured by the managing director that there is no issue with resourcing. And so I wonder why we're now finding that there is a resourcing issue for training that is, or as we've already heard from the monitoring officer, a really important matter to make sure that members are trained and that we can offer that training to councillors who maybe cannot attend training sessions.
Councillor Mr Newport, the suggestion will be to work closely with other councils, so members would be able to access training. Did the monitoring officer want to come back on anything that Councillor Newport asked?
Yes, Chairman, with regards to training, as I mentioned, it is not a statutory requirement. However, if a decision was to end up in an appeal situation in the magistrates court or the county court, and the judge had asked, are your members sufficiently trained? And those members who made that decision hadn't been trained or attended training, then we couldn't give that assurance, and that would put the decision into jeopardy. When I'm asked by our auditors to give assurance around training, not just for members but also officers, you know, is the training up to date? If members do not attend, I could not give assurance to the auditors that members are up to date on their training. With regards to the capacity issue, Chairman, if I just may add, we are in an unusual situation this year in that we're still in the middle of a pandemic, legislation continues to change, and the pressure on our enforcement officers, not just the licensing team, but other enforcement officers, due to the rapidly changing legislation, has put extra pressure on them, and therefore there is a capacity issue this year. However, this may not be the case next year. Training will be given to members. It just won't be given internally for the time being. We will source external and other training methods for members.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Steptoe.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm going to raise a number of points on all the recommendations. First of all, recommendation 1, I don't have a problem with the basis of the recommendation, but I do think it needs to be a little bit more clarified on two points. One is the allocation of the funding on a training or conference a member to go on has to have the agreement of all of the group leaders. I know from experience that on occasions that has been refused. One group member leader has refused attending. There is no obligation for them to give a reason as to why that should be. So I would like to see there that there is I was going to say selection of reasons why they can't go, rather than perhaps they just don't like that particular member and doesn't want them to go on it. I feel that needs to be bolstered a little bit and to clarify that particular point. The second paragraph after that is that following the conference of course, to give a written or verbal report to the rest of the council. Again, I know from experience that that's not always necessarily possible. So again, I'd like to see some clarification with regards to that. That needs to be strengthened there a little bit.
Thank you.
With regards to recommendation 2, the training issue, again, I'm speaking from experience, having been on the licensing committee before, where we've had a very serious licensing issue. There are some members that will remember the one I'm talking about, where we had to actually have a reserve of members to serve on the appeals committee or the licensing committee panel in case somebody dropped out because it was so complicated. Now, I believe that the panel is usually made up of 3 members. If you need to have people in reserve, that's another 3. So I personally think that all members of the licensing committee should have the appeals and licensing training. So again, I feel that. And picking up on your point on item number 3, I wouldn't disagree with you in saying that that is an operational matter and not necessarily a policy matter. Oh, there's one other point, just going back to the training, with regards to having training from outside councils, I'm assuming that the basis of the training will be very similar to any training that we give, but is there any parts of that training that are policy specific? If that is the case, then that may be a slight issue for the trainers if they've been given by other councils. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Just before I pass back to Councillor Mrs Mason, there are a couple more questions, but one thing that I would like to have considered in your amendments, Councillor Mrs Mason, is on page 7.1, at paragraph 2.1 of the report, on page 7.1 of the report, there is a recommendation that in respect of non-mandatory training, there are 2 sessions of training that are offered, and fewer than 25% of members, including parish town council representatives, are booked to attend. Officers consider amalgamating the 2 and running just the session that has the greatest number of members booked to attend. Affected members would therefore be advised as only 1 session would run. I completely understand the sentiment behind this, but I think we have a problem in the fact that sometimes councillors change more frequently through parish councils. So I wonder if we could change that to a number. Instead, that it would read that in respect of non-mandatory training, where 2 sessions of training are offered and fewer than 10 members, including parish town council representatives. So if we could change that percentage to a number, that would be my suggestion, Councillor Mrs Mason. Councillor Mrs Gooding, you've got a question?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to endorse what Councillor Steptoe has mentioned, and obviously falling in line with Angela Law's recommendation that we should have the training in order to be on the licensing and appeals, and that really should be then made mandatory. If you're going to be a member, you'd only be a sitting member that couldn't be chosen because that there wouldn't be the backing to know that you've had the training. So I would agree with Councillor Steptoe on that point.
I see no other hands up or raised at the present. Is there any other questions, anybody, before I hand back to Councillor Mrs Mason? No. Councillor Mrs Mason, would you like to come back?
Just to get my mouse in the right place. Well, I thought we'd had all this out at the meeting, but there we go. Let's start and go over it again. Some of those comments I quite agree with, some are wrong. So can we just take the recommendations as they are and see if we can get a consensus one at a time, because obviously it's going to be difficult. So if I deal with the first recommendation, 2.1, I certainly have got no objection to that being changed to 10, and I don't think anyone else would. However, that is the existing policy. It's not our policy that was made from the working group. If the chairman will recall, I think she was at the last meeting, that was something that we just put in there as to remind people. We haven't altered it, we haven't changed it. It is the policy of the council at present. But as I say, I've got no objection to 2.1 to be altered. The only alteration I would make and I would propose is at the moment it says a book to attend. Officers should consider amalgamating the two and running just the one session. I think we should change that slightly to officers should take all steps to amalgamate. It may not be possible, obviously, if we've committed to outside trainers, but the reason behind this was a cost one, and there have been sessions where there have been 2 or 3 people, which is obviously very time consuming and costly in both council officer time and costs, or if we have to engage again. But again, no objection. So subject to the 10 members and officers should take all steps to amalgamate, then I'm quite happy if that accommodates your...
I will gladly second that, Councillor Mrs Mason. I'm glad we both saw a couple of points there to rectify.
Can you put that one to the vote and get that one away so that we don't get confused? Is that, Madam Chairman, or do you want to take them all at the end?
I think let's take them all at the end, if that's okay. Sonia, are you keeping a record of these amendments?
Right. Yeah. The recommendations to council, again, that is not changing it. That is the existing council policy that hasn't changed. I think I can only speak as a group leader who has been approached, and I've been approached to fund things which could be easily funded by dual-hatted councillors from the county council, and there have really been county council issues. So in that case, we would say no, the funding should come from another council. But that aside, I do think there is a point there. One of the things I wanted to change was that they should receive feedback. After all, these courses are very expensive. You're talking hundreds of pounds. There should be feedback given. And we said either written or verbal. We're not suggesting that it's a big report, but it can be done in the members' time. They can send an email to everyone. They can have a meeting and do it that way. We put both in to allow for people that wouldn't want to give a written report. And I think it should actually be timed within 3 months of attending, so that the benefit of those courses that those individuals go on benefits the whole council. It's a substantial amount, £1,500. I don't believe it's ever actually been used to its total. I accept Councillor Steptoe's point, subject to the agreement of all group leaders, and perhaps that ought to be changed, the agreement of the majority. I'd be quite happy to. But again, this is not a recommendation. This was a reiteration of the policy of the council. But I have no objection to that being altered there, should that satisfy Councillor Steptoe's concerns.
Yeah, can I come back on that?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Pearson, is that okay to come back on that?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Councillor Steptoe.
I still think that I pick up on the point that Councillor Mason, Mrs Mason's comment about it being a majority of the group members. That would make the situation a little easier. But I do feel that there should be specific reasons. She commented on there the fact that it was, she quoted a case where it could have possibly been a county member. That was not the one I had particularly in mind. The particular member at the time, and still is not, was not a member of another council that would have had benefit from this. So I do feel that there should be specific reasons why a group leader can refuse the situation. So I think that needs to be worked out.
Councillor Steptoe would like to give the reasons that he considers acceptable to him, and see if everyone agrees. I have no objection to there being a selection of reasons, but what
I
don't know. Pardon?
Chair, if I can come back on that.
Yes,
Discuss
Councillor.
So I can't give reasons off the top of my head for something that this is an existing council policy. So it would be wrong of me to try and to formulate reasons now. But as Councillor Steptoe has obviously thought this through, perhaps he would be able to give us some.
Yes, certainly. I think it should be on the basis of what the benefit is to the council itself. If the group leader was, for example, not to feel it was a benefit for the council, to give their reasons why that was not a benefit. And if, for example, a member has the opportunity to have going on a course where they're perhaps a member of a group that can get a discount on that, again, I think the group leaders ought to take that into account. They're the two that I can give off the top of my head, but I think in essence that if a group leader has a problem with somebody going on a particular course, that should be parted to the monitoring officer, rather than, not necessarily to the member, but to the monitoring officer, to make sure it is a valid reason.
Yeah, did you, Councillor Steptoe, would you like that changed, that suggestion changed to a majority of group leaders rather than all group leaders?
Yes, I would be happier with that. I think that would be more, that would be fair. Perhaps 2/3.
Could we please, for the benefit of our officers, just clarify that amendment, please, Councillor Mrs Mason?
Right, Councillor Steptoe, correct me if I go wrong. So that the current arrangements for funding attendance for individual members of the council at external training or conference be confirmed. As you see, they were nothing that we altered, with the addition of the requirement for the member to provide feedback, either written or verbal, within 3 months of attending to the rest of the council. And then as follows, that an amount of 1,500 be identified each year out of the member training budget for individual members to be able to request attendance at external conferences, training courses, the allocation of such training to be subject to the agreement of a majority of group leaders, and the reasons for refusal or acceptance, because it's the same, isn't it? Refusal for or acceptance would be benefit to the council, or economic reasons. I think we'll say, rather than a member getting, I think it's a bit discriminatory actually, because a member gets a discount, but or perhaps economic benefit to the council.
Chairman, I'd be happy to accept that as an amendment.
Thank you.
But then the other sentence again, that following the conference call, that the member be required to give feedback, written or verbal, to the rest of the council within 3 months of attending. That's a repeat, but as it did, you might as well repeat it. Are you happy with that, Councillor?
Yes, I'll accept that.
Good. I mean, there was no intention of changing it, but if we can improve things, let's do so.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs Mason, do you want to move on to the next recommendation?
Right, the licensing and appeals. Now that this obviously has been a contentious subject over the time, and there's quite a few issues here that have come up that seems to be, we can't make something mandatory just because someone suggests it. So the situation is that the committee training is not mandatory, and we have to encourage that. So I would, the one word that I had already put in there that I would like the committee to consider changing is where it reads a further course or one-to-one training, both subjects to be offered as needed. Well, in the light of what's being said, as needed, if possible, and with the approval of the chairman of the committee, is fine. And I've got no objection to it being sourced from outside, attending other councils, but I don't know how practical that would be. Bearing in mind, the monitoring officer has just said that, you know, we should be back to normal hopefully next year. The internal training, the members, the majority of the members obviously felt that the internal trainer was very good. I must say that personally I felt that the trainer that we had externally was also very good. So this year, that is. So I'm not quite sure how you want that altered. We could
May I?
one-to-one training as possible, and approved by the chair of standards, if that is acceptable to Councillor McPherson.
Well, actually, Councillor Mrs Mason, I've been drafting something as we were working through the papers. I was thinking of the wording of a further course or one-to-one training on both subjects to be offered if officer capacity permits, or externally resourced, whilst mindful of our taxi conditions, because our conditions with our taxi licensing do differ slightly from local authority to local authority. Would that be agreeable?
Yes, the only thing I would like to alter is that where we put must in, I must admit we did it with a bit of cheek because we knew that it wasn't compulsory. It's members of the Licensing and Appeals Committee should attend at least one training session, but are encouraged to attend both. We cannot compel, and the reasons for that, I will go into some of the reasons there have been difficulties. I mean, an officer phoned me up, agreed to reduce a report, wanted to give a report, gave us actually a different thing to what we'd agreed over the phone, which is the document that Councillor Mrs McPherson is referring to, which I have incorporated as far as I can. But the reason that there are difficulties with members training for licensing and appeals is because members have taken the training and they haven't been used, because the method of using or of contacting members that are trained has been such that it's disadvantaged members that aren't sitting at the end of the phone. That means they're discouraged. That means they don't get training. And there's lots of other reasons. I mean, it's perceived by some members as a political bias. I'm not saying that it is. It's certainly perceived as discriminatory. And again, I'm not saying that it is, but some people are concerned about that. That is the reason why the procedure was put in. But it was trying to make a bigger pool of members that are trained to assist the officers in getting members to serve on the committee. So certainly with the change that Councillor McPherson's put, and if we can change the must to should, are you happy with that, Councillor Mrs McPherson?
I'm sorry, Councillor Mrs Mason, are you still talking on recommendation 2 or have you moved on to 3?
2, yes.
Recommendation 2, I'm fine with, yes. It's recommendation 3 that I would like removed.
Right, recommendation 3 came about because of the problems that were created by the officers, the procedure that the officers were using. What we have done in the committee, if we have kept as far as possible to the procedure that the officers use, we shouldn't have to do this, but we have had to do it because of the way that members were requested to, or not requested to, attend appeal hearings. So there's no, even if you insist that members are trained, you can't compel them to attend the appeals. So we want to make it as attractive as possible and as fair as possible. And the whole of this item, this procedure, which was agreed at the end of a very lengthy discussion, which I'm sure the independent members will recall, was to ensure fairness and inclusivity. Because otherwise we will go back to the situation that we've had, and I think was serious last year, where an officer had difficulty in finding people to go on to an appeals hearing, as I understand it, because people weren't available. And people weren't available because members didn't want to do the training, because members don't want to be trained when that training is not going to be utilised. So I do think that's an important part of the recommendations, and I'm not happy to withdraw it. It's a recommendation from the whole group. The only recommendation that I would like to add, and this is again to facilitate members, you must remember that training is for the benefit of members. and we are asking members to give up their time. A lot of our members work. So I would like to also put another recommendation in that we request that consideration is given to the licensing and appeals committees to be held in the evenings, so that members serving on those committees can use the spare daytime hours that their employers may have allowed them for hearing. There are some members that will be able to take perhaps 1 or 2 daytime sessions off for a hearing, but if they've utilised that their employer's generosity to attend meetings, then that diminishes the pool of people available for the hearings. And the whole point of that procedure is to encourage a greater participation and to facilitate member involvement.
First of all, our monitoring officer would like to come back on a few things, I believe.
Chairman, thank you very much. Training is important. Training for members will actually extend the pool of members that we can pick from when it comes to a situation where we do have to run a review or a hearing at short notice. I don't agree with Councillor Mrs Mason's comments around the procedure not working previously. I do think it has worked. It is just the nature of the legislation as to how it's been drafted. We simply can't, if we had a review hearing that has to be held within 5 working days, to make the first call and then wait until the next day for an answer at 10 AM, that first day of the 5 working days is already gone. And then if that member is not available, then we have to make the second call and wait for the next.
Sorry, you've not read the procedure.
Excuse me, Councillor Mrs Mason. Councillor Mrs Mason, could we please let the monitoring officer finish?
It's not procedure.
Councillor Mrs Mason, could we please let the monitoring officer finish? Thank you.
So sorry. So I am speaking to. I know I'm speaking to number 3 at the moment. Sorry. So our previous procedures do work and they continue to work. In response to Councillor Mrs Mason's amendment to say that the members of the Licensing and Appeals should attend at least one, I'm from officer's point of view, I do not advise agreement to that. But it's, as I said, the more members we can have trained, the more choice we can have when it comes to selecting for any review hearings, any appeal hearings, especially if, say, you know, we have a serious incident within our district with regards to any of the licenses. We do need to be able to get that hearing up and running as soon as possible. I just want to make one more comment about evening appeal hearings. The Licensing and Appeals Committee, the appeals members, they are acting in a quasi-judicial manner, and some licensees will have legal representatives attending with them. It wouldn't be practical for us to suggest that the hearings happen in the evening, because maybe their legal representative may not be able to attend. The courts don't offer evening appeal hearings or any hearings in the evening. So we need to also take into consideration the livelihoods of those licensees whose licenses are at risk of being revoked or suspended.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Steptoe, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I did have my hand up for a comment on item recommendation 2 there in the brackets. There was a comment that we can't make it mandatory. I believe that we can, because planning is mandatory, which is I'm trying to quote the legal officer, quasi-legal situation where you are acting in a legal capacity. And I do feel that the training, if we've got members on that particular committee or that particular panel that is not properly trained, we are going to leave ourselves wide open for appeal against us, and obviously the cost of doing that. So I have a concern with that. With regards to item 3, I don't see the relevance of item 3 at all. The system was working quite well before. As the monitoring officer has already said, to hold meetings in the evening would not be practical because of the legal representation that a person may wish to have. So we've got to take that into account as well. So I can't support either of those 2 recommendations as they currently stand.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Yeah, as a point of order, the monitoring officer has misunderstood and misrepresented 2 of the statements I made. Firstly, I did not suggest the appeals were held in the evenings. I understand the complexities and the difficulties that I suggested the Licensing and Appeals Committee was held in the evenings. I'm well aware that other people attend and wouldn't be able to attend in the evening. So that's a misleading statement.
Thank you for clarifying that.
If you let me finish, the procedure again of the telephone call does not take 5 days. If you look at item 10, the example, those calls, and I don't know that we could have made it much clearer, those calls are all made at the same time in the first day. So the officer makes a first call, a second call, a third call, a fourth, consecutive calls until they get the number of people they want. And by 10 o'clock the next day, they will have their committee confirmed. So that is not delaying at all. It is, however, keeping members acquainted. In the past, and this has been verbalised by members in committee, and they've told with examples where members have trained for over 2 years and not been asked once. We have had members that have come off of the committee because their training wasn't utilised. We have had, we're told that by the officers that they phone the first people they know they want to be available. That is not democratic. And perhaps we don't want a democratic committee. I will interject there, please, Councillor Mrs Mason. As you rightly said, you've highlighted the issue in the past. The officer has been aware of the issues that you've raised before. The officer has addressed that in finding members for the panel. It is an operational matter, this, and I do not think recommendation 3 should be on the table, I'm afraid. Councillor Mrs Gooding.
I totally agree with you, Councillor Macpherson, and I would further support what Councillor Steptoe has suggested, that the mandatory training in order for the monitoring officer to have confidence in the members to be on the panel, to be trained, would be my preferred recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going back to this procedure and the comments about this being an operational matter, I actually don't find it. I actually don't find that we shouldn't be helping officers if we think the operational matters can be tweaked and made better, because I've spoken to many an officer and made suggestions about operational matters. I've spoken to portfolio holders about operational matters could be made better, and they've all been willing to listen and to adopt some of those operational matters. And I think that in an example, myself, if I was on a member that was trained and being phoned up to be on one of those panels, that maybe I couldn't answer my phone if I was at work. So, you know, it seems like a bit of a, at the moment, some respects a bit of a panic situation where it shouldn't, and more opportunity should be given to those of us that are trained and wish to go on the panel. And I think this procedure, this operational procedure, could be tweaked and make it more inclusive for other members that perhaps are at work and they're unable to answer their phone straight away. You know, and you know, as long as they get back to the officer, I don't really see any reasons why we should object.
Councillor Newport, I can only speak from personal experience. Having sat on licensing and appeals for some years, I've received calls, I've received messages, and I have called the officer back and taken up that opportunity. Some of this is quite historical now, and the officer has readdressed some of the operations themselves to make sure that it is more inclusive for everyone. Councillor, Mr. Steptoe, you want to come back?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I'd like to make two proposals, if I may. Firstly, with I've lost it here. 2.2 item 2, that we make that a mandatory situation. That I feel gives the confidence to the officer and the legal side of things to make sure that that is the case. And
could
thirdly,
we just, sorry to interrupt you, Councillor Steptoe, could I just confirm with the monitoring officer that that is possible?
Chairman, I believe Councillor Mrs Mason had made a motion to amend the recommendations, so we need to we are having a debate on those and we need to vote on those. If that motion fails, then perhaps Councillor Steptoe may be able to put forward his recommendations for amendment.
Thank you. Councillor, Mr. Steptoe, did you want to say anything more on that? Because we will go back to these motions.
yes, I'll hold back on the proposals under the guidance of the officer there. But I was going to say on the item 2.23, picking up on Councillor Newport's point there, that it would be perhaps a suggested method for officers to adopt rather than for the standards committee to impose.
Okay, there's some food for thought. I can see no more hands raised, so I think we need to take these recommendations one at a time, unless the officers want to tell me otherwise. And if we can return to you, please, Councillor Mrs Mason, to take these individually.
Right, so if we go right back to, oh dear, where were we? 2.1. I think Sonia has the wording for that one, doesn't she? So, do you want me to read it through again, or has the officer got that?
I've got it for paragraph 2.1.
Yeah, it was to change the 25% to 10, and officers should take all steps to amalgamate to run just one session. So perhaps you'd like to read it, Sonia, so that everyone's clear on what they're voting.
Certainly. The current arrangements for minimum attendance at training sessions, excluding planning, licensing and appeals training, be confirmed as follows. That in respect of non-mandatory training, where 2 sessions of training are offered and fewer than 10 members, including parish, town council representatives, are booked to attend, officers should take all steps to amalgamate the 2 and running just the session that has a greater number of members booked to attend. Affected members to be advised that only 1 session would be run.
Chairman, I understand you were the seconder for that amendment?
I am, yes, thank you. So I've seconded that, and Sonia, can we go to a vote on that?
Of course. So same as before, please, members. If when I call your name, if you could indicate if you want a recorded vote, and then whether you want to vote for, or against, or abstain. So, Councillor Mrs Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Recorded vote and 4.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Gooding.
No recorded vote and 4, thank you.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No recorded vote and 4.
Councillor Mrs Lumley.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs Macpherson.
No recorded vote and 4.
Councillor Newport.
No and 4, please.
Councillor Steptoe.
No and against.
And Councillor Wilson.
No and 4. Thank you.
So that's no recorded vote and 7 for and 1 against.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason, if we can go back to you for the first recommendation under 2.2.
Okay, the current arrangements for funding attendance for individual members of the council at external training or conference been confirmed, with the addition of the requirement for the member to provide feedback, either written or verbal, within 3 months of attending the rest of the council. And the confirmation is this, that an amount of up to £1,500 being identified each year out of the member training budget for individual members to be able to request attendance at external conference training courses. The allocation of such training to be subject to the agreement of a majority of group leaders. The reason for refusal or acceptance would be the benefit to the discouncil of financial considerations. I think that's basically what Councillor Steptoe and I agreed. Is that correct, Councillor Steptoe?
And that's it.
And seconder, please.
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Sonia, if you could do the vote, please.
So, Councillor Mrs Carter.
Thank you. No recorded vote and agree.
Councillor Mrs Gooding.
No recorded vote and agreed.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and agreed.
Councillor Mrs Lumley.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs Macpherson.
No and 4.
Councillor Newport.
No and 4.
Councillor Steptoe.
No and 4.
Councillor Wilson.
No and 4.
It's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs Mason, the second recommendation under 2.2.
I think this is the one that we altered to your requirements, Madam Chairman, and that you seconded it. So I'll read it through and correct me if I'm not got it correct. That Licensing and Appeals Committee training be similar to that of Development Committee training. One course to be offered for licensing training, daytime and evening. One course to be offered for taxi appeals training, daytime and evening. A further course, a one-to-one training on both subjects to be offered as capacity permits or external courses are available if they are suitable. Details of further courses to be determined by the Chairman of Standards Committee and Chairman of the Working Group. Members of the Licensing and Appeals Committee should attend at least one training session, but are encouraged to attend both each municipal year, preferably by the end of September for that municipal year. So that's what we agreed on. I don't know, I think Councillor Steptoe actually wanted it altered again, but I'm happy to listen to any suggestions.
Thank you. I will second that amendment.
Chair, I didn't hear the last part of what Councillor Mrs Mason there said. Can you?
I said,
repeat it, please?
yes, certainly, Councillor. I said I think you wanted it slightly altered, and I'm quite happy to accommodate that within reason, but I wasn't sure where you wanted it altered. I think it was towards the end.
My suggestion was that it should be mandatory training.
Well, that's not in the proposal, so we've got a proposal and a seconder.
Okay. Sonia, could you put that to the vote, please?
Yes, so Councillor Mrs Carter.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. No recorded vote and agree.
Councillor Mrs Gooding.
No recorded vote and against.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and agreed.
Councillor Mrs Lumley. Councillor Mrs Lumley. Sorry, you're on mute. Oh, there we go.
Oh, sorry.
That's it.
No and against.
Councillor Mrs Macpherson.
No and 4.
Councillor Newport.
No and 4.
Councillor Steptoe.
No and against.
Councillor Wilson.
No and 4.
So there's no recorded vote and 5 voted for and 3 against.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason, you've got a third recommendation.
The third one was the proposed procedure, which seems to have been the most controversial, but it was the one that was aiming to be the most fully inclusive. I think someone suggested that we make this a suggestion or an outline or a guideline. I'm quite happy to go along with that. We didn't want to over-prescribe. What we didn't want is to disillusion members that have done the training. So I'm quite happy to sort of change that to a suggested guideline for the officers. If that was... Pardon?
Chairman, could I just add a little bit to that, if possible?
Yes, you can, Councillor Steptoe.
Yes, a suggested guideline where practical.
Councillor Mrs Mason, are you happy with that wording?
Yes, I can't see what's the issue seems to be expecting a member to be on the end of the phone at that minute that that officer phones. And I as long as there's some time lag, I mean, we put 10 o'clock in because it was the next day, someone would come home from work and leave a message. But so we were trying to be as practical as possible, but I don't mind that. What I wouldn't want is for the system that happened before where...
Yeah, Councillor Mrs Mason, could we just have your recommendation put forward as you would like it read, please?
A proposed guideline as far as possible, perhaps as far as possible.
I think it was where practical that Councillor Steptoe just suggested.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Well, I think it is practical. So, generally speaking, I am concerned that if we just say we're practical, someone will say it's not practical. So I think the objective should try to use it as an outline rather than not. But having said that, I've got no strong feelings because when it comes down to it, the people that will suffer at the end of this will be the council itself. If it disenfranchises members by disillusioning them and not, then they won't be pending appeals. So I think
Councillor Mrs Mason, I'm going to press you a little bit. Could we have your revised recommendation, please?
Well, yes, proposed procedure, proposed guidelines. How would that suit? I'm happy to take it as that.
So
I'll change it to proposed guidelines for the organisation of premises licensing hearing.
Okay, Sonia, would you like to read that out? Would you like me to read it out, and I can be corrected if you would like? That the proposed guidelines for the organisation of premises licensing hearing and taxi licensing appeals be attached as to this report.
Chairman, if I may, I'm just reading the recommendation in full. If you read it from 2.2, it is further proposed by the working group that the committee recommends to council that the proposed guidelines, you're almost, without being pedantic, it sounds like you're proposing guidelines for council to adopt, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was repeating Councillor Mrs Mason's
Yeah,
words.
I appreciate. I just think the wording may need a bit of tweaking. Take into account the first few words of the recommendations. So if we read it to say, it is further proposed by the working group that the committee recommends to council that the proposed guideline, without being, like I said, without being pedantic, it sounds like you are proposing those guidelines to council and for them to accept that, rather than making it as a suggestion for officers to follow.
I would like to thank the Assistant Director. Yes, I think that's a very helpful alteration.
So, Councillor Mrs Mason, just for clarity, could you please read out that third recommendation?
I haven't noted that down, so perhaps Angela could do that for you.
So I would suggest, let me think.
Sorry.
It is further proposed by the working group that the committee recommends to council the suggested guidelines for the organisation of premises licensing hearings and taxi licensing appeals be as attached to this report.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Mrs Mason?
Yes, yes, thank you, Angela.
Lovely. Have we a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second that. Chairman.
Who was that, please?
Sorry, Councillor Newport.
Thank you. So, Sonia, would you take it to the vote, please?
So, Councillor Mrs Carter.
Thank you. No recorded vote and for.
Councillor Mrs Gooding.
No recorded vote and against.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs Lumley.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs McPherson.
No and against.
Councillor Newport.
No and 4. Could you note my vote in the minutes, please?
Councillor Steptoe.
No and against.
And Councillor Wilson.
No and 4.
So that's 5, 4 and 3 against.
Thank you very much. Sorry, could you give us those figures again, please, Sonia, so we know?
5, 4 and 3 against.
Okay, so that motion's moved. That, I believe, concludes our agenda for the evening.
Sorry, Chairman, apologies. I'm going to take the belt and braces approach here. So what's just happened is that members had made amendments were made and seconded, and members had accepted all those amendments. Perhaps just for clarification, can we take through you, Chairman, if agreeable, a vote on block for recommendation, the new amended recommendations 2.1 and 2.2, just so we can get a final approval on the new wording of the recommendations as agreed. So what just happened was that we agreed the amendments, but we haven't actually agreed the recommendations.
Yes, thank you. If you can take us through those.
Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
I'm a little unclear there because if you're going to do all of those on block, I would have to vote against them all as a block vote because I'm not happy with some of the recommendations.
Yeah, actually, if we can go back to the monitoring officer, why?
In that case, why?
Well, I voted against some of the recommendations.
So, Chairman, you would need agreement that with the committee members that they're happy to take it en bloc, but you have Councillor Mike Steptoe who wants who's not in agreement. So you would have to take those 4 recommendations separately. So, Chairman, you would need to vote on the new recommendation 2.1.
Okay, so let me just clarify this, please. This is because we have voted on amendments.
Yes.
Those amendments now stand as we just have. Now we are just voting for exactly the same, but as a whole.
No, you're voting for the new recommendations with the amendments in. So you agreed the amendments. Those amendments are agreed. Yeah. And now it means that those recommendations has been amended as per the vote. So so 2.1, for example, will read that in respect of non-mandatory training, where 2 sessions of the training are offered and fewer than 10 members. So you're voting for that new recommendation, not the amendment. The recommendation has been amended. So perhaps if Sonia could read out each of the new recommendations and we take a vote on each of those. You're not voting for the amendments, you're voting for the actual recommendation now.
Right. Okay, I might need assistance on that because in terms
I don't like to challenge our monitoring officer, but if we have voted individually on each amendment, I'm a little bit lost why we're having to do the process again.
So, Chairman, those recommendations have been changed because amendments were put forward, proposed and seconded, and those amendments were accepted. So now you, instead of the recommendation that's on paper, you have new recommendation that's slightly amended. If all members had agreed, we could have taken both recommendations en bloc. However, as Councillor Steptoe has said, he didn't necessarily agree with those new recommendations. So you will need to take each recommendation separately.
Okay.
So it's Councillor Steptoe, I'm just using an example. Councillor Steptoe did not agree with recommendation 1, was it, Councillor Steptoe? And
I didn't agree with recommendation 2.2, but
yeah.
Perhaps I can help the monitor officer here a little bit. The recommendation has been amended on 2.1, and that now becomes the substantive motion.
Yeah.
And then recommendation 2.2 in each individual item has been amended, and each one of those becomes a substantive motion. I think that's correct.
Yes.
Individually.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I'm ever so sorry, Sonia. It is on 3.
The other thing that I just want to clarify also, if am I correct in thinking that Councillor Mrs Mason also moved an additional, recommendation to the paragraph 2.2, item 4, which was around the scheduling of the full licensing and appeals committee in the evenings for consideration to be given to that. And I don't think we actually voted on that sort of additional amendment to the to the motion at paragraph 2.2.
If I can
Mrs Mason.
If I can clarify, Madam Chairman, I did put the motion, but I didn't put it as an amendment to 2.2. I put it as an additional motion. Basically, that the committee requests that consideration be given to the Licensing and Appeals Committee meeting, not the.
Chairman, I don't believe that was seconded.
No, it hasn't been seconded as far as I'm aware. I don't know if there is someone to second it.
Okay. Right. So if we go to recommendation 2.1, so it's proposed by the working group that the committee resolves that the current arrangements for minimum attendance at training sessions, excluding planning, licensing, and appeals training, be confirmed as follows. that in respect of non-mandatory training where 2 sessions of training are offered and fewer than 10 members, including parish, town council representatives, are booked to attend, officers, where are we?
If I gave you the
Too many
word,
bits of paper here.
officers should take all steps to amalgamate the 2 sessions and running just the session.
Right, officers should take all steps to amalgamate the 2 sessions and run just the session that has the greater number of members booked to attend. Affected members to be advised that only 1 session was run. So we can sort of take a vote on that one, please, first of all, on that substantive motion as amended. Councillor Mrs. Carter.
Thank you. No recorded vote and 4.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Gooding.
No recorded vote and 4. Thank you.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs. Lumley.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs. McPherson.
No and 4.
Councillor Newport.
No and 4.
Councillor Steptoe.
No and against.
And Councillor Wilson.
No and 4.
So that is 7 for and 1 against. Okay. So moving on to 2.2 and recommendation 1, that the current arrangements for funding attendance for individual members of the council at external training or conference be confirmed, with the addition of the requirement for the member to provide feedback, either written or verbal, to the rest of the council within 3 months of attending. That an amount of up to £1,500 be identified each year out of the member training budget for individual members to be able to request attendance at external conferences, training courses. The allocation of such training to be subject to the agreement of the majority of group leaders, and that following the conference and subject to reasons provided in support of or against that decision based on economic benefit to the council, and that following that's a repetition, I think. So I think that's where it ends. Is that correct? So if I could ask members.
I'm sorry, Sonia, that's not quite correct. It was the reasons were the refusal or acceptance were the benefit to the council and financial considerations.
Okay.
That's what we actually voted on.
So
Atlantic, but let's get it right.
The benefit to the council and financial considerations.
Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the that sort of substantive motion at 2.21, Councillor Mrs. Carter.
Thank you. No recorded vote and 4.
Councillor Mrs. Gooding.
No recorded vote and 4. Thank you.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs. Lumley.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs. McPherson.
No and 4.
Councillor Newport.
No and 4.
Councillor Steptoe.
No and 4.
Councillor Wilson.
No and 4.
Okay, that one's unanimous. Right, so moving to recommendation 2, that licensing and appeals committee training be similar to that of development committee training. 1 course to be offered for licensing training daytime and evening. 1 course to be offered for taxi appeals training daytime and evening. A further course or one-to-one training on both subjects to be offered
If officer capacity permits, or externally resourced.
Okay. So details for the courses to be determined by the Chairman of Standards Committee and Chairman of the Working Group. Members of the Licensing and Appeals Committee should attend at least one training session, but are encouraged to attend both each municipal year by the end of September in that municipal year. So,
Oh, sorry, Sonia, Madam Chair, may I just come in? We missed a couple of words there. It was externally resourced if suitable. Who were your words, actually?
hold on. So, externally resourced if suitable.
Thank you. Apologies for interrupting.
That's fine. So, Councillor Mrs. Carter.
Thank you. No recorded vote and 4.
Councillor Mrs. Gooding.
No recorded vote and against, thank you.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs. Lumley.
No and against.
Councillor Mrs. McPherson.
No and 4.
Councillor Newport.
No and 4, please.
Councillor Stepton.
No and against.
Councillor Wilson.
No and 4.
So that's 5 voting for this substantive motion and 3 against. Then moving on to the last recommendation set out in the report, the substantive motion, I believe, was that that the guidelines for the organisation of premises licensing hearings and taxi licensing appeals to be as attached to the report.
I believe it was the suggested guidelines for the organisation, Chairman.
Thank you. Would our monitoring officer like to clarify that whole recommendation and make it easy?
I think it was agreed that the wording would be the suggested guidelines for the organisation of the premises licensing hearings and taxi licensing appeals be attached to this report.
Okay. So, Councillor Mrs. Carter.
Thank you. No recorded vote and 4.
Councillor Mrs. Gooding.
No recorded vote and against.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs. Lumley.
No and 4.
Councillor Mrs. McPherson.
No and against.
Councillor Newport.
No and 4. And could you note my vote in the minutes, please?
Councillor Steptoe.
No and against.
Councillor Wilson.
No and 4.
So that's 5 votes for the substantive motion and 3 against.
Thank you. I think that does now conclude this evening. And may I say thank you very much, everyone, and our officers, and have a lovely rest of the evening. Thank you. Good night.
Right.